wanted to, we might have one person joining us tonight. Wanted to make one just quick note before diving into the two items that we have tonight. So the first item is the existing neighborhoods. We'd like to kind of go over some of the kind of direction that we're taking with that code. The district itself, we've kind of already talked about over a few meetings. And then most of this working session, we're proposing that we focus on the Old Town residential questions. And so we have quite a bit of materials to help facilitate that discussion. But before going into that, just wanted to note, the city has an engagement page called Lafayette Listens. It's a great interactive tool that we use on any kind of community engagement project. And so if you Google Lafayette Listens, we would find the land use code page, and that's what this is. So if you're talking with someone in the community, we just wanted to mention that they can register here and get project updates. And so prior to this meeting, we sent out an update informing folks who are registered that this group was meeting. There's some information in the body of the page just about the project, the different steps that's taken place, any upcoming meetings right now. The videos, so we have some different videos we've shared with the working group as well as the actual videos from the meetings. And so those are up here as well. And then there's things here. This is kind of a post, and just another example post that we did. This one's kind of corny about, anyway, linking a snowmobile accident to land use regulations. So there's also some mapping and stories. These haven't gotten a ton of use. And so we'd expect that when we do some more engagement, likely in August is what we're aiming for, that this will be, we'll be pushing this out a lot more. We've done a soft launch at this point. So wanted to mention that in case you had questions from community members, just sort of where to steer them. So let's see. So the first item that we have for the working group this evening is around existing neighborhoods. So we'll do a brief staff presentation. We'll run through just the code that was included in your packet, point out some of the highlights of the code, kind of just let you know where we're heading with it, knowing that we're actively working with the consultant team on tweaks to this. They have other ideas that they are suggesting. And so, this will look a little bit different the next time you see it, but we wanted to just let you see where we're going, see if you have any ideas, and especially like with graphics, layout, and things like that. So it's been, I don't know if they're still in session, but today is the last day of the General Assembly in Colorado. It's been a really busy year for planners, I think, session. And so we know that a number of bills have already passed or will. Some of those are included here. So I think everyone's pretty aware of the transit-oriented communities bill. That's a bill that in Lafayette will likely mean that we'll go through a process to change zoning, likely around South Boulder Road, looping around to Willoughby Corner to allow for pretty substantial increases in housing to the tune of about 40 dwelling units per acre. The bill itself is close to 100 pages, 90 pages. It's really complex, and there's been a lot of amendments, so we have to dig back into the bill. But we were able to meet with the governor's office and the bill drafters over the last few weeks and actually get some amendments to the bill that are favorable to Lafayette, which was really helpful.
I read that bill today.
Yeah, it did. Yeah. Yep. There's a parking bill that was watered down that was going to eliminate minimum parking statewide. It's my understanding that now it's really focused around transit areas. Even there, cities will have an option to still require minimum parking if they make certain findings. There's an accessory dwelling units bill that passed that'll allow accessory dwelling units statewide. It'll also limit the city's ability to regulate certain things like parking and certain like discretionary requirements that aren't clearly measurable. And so there might be some tweaks to our regulations that we need to do as a result of that. Residential occupancy limits. We did a bunch of work on this earlier in the year, and then 2 days later, we had a memo for you. 2 days later, they introduced this bill. So zoning codes have typically had a definition of a household or a family that limits unrelated people. And so what this bill does, it prohibits that practice and instead ties it to life safety building code requirements. So we're probably going to bring a code amendment to council in the pretty near future to just take care of that now. And then we did also get an in-kind grant from a local agency to draft our landscaping standards a little bit faster than the rest of the code. And so it'll be in compliant with the state requirements that were just passed around landscaping. And it'll be hyper local to the what we need here in Colorado. So you'll be probably seeing that in the next 4 to 6 months of that draft out there. So all ready to really be adopted. So the general approach to existing neighborhoods, we've had a lot of discussion about existing housing neighborhoods. There's a lot of different components that kind of goes into it. We've had a discussion about neighborhoods serving commercial lightly. We had a very robust discussion last meeting about housing choices. So introducing certain duplexes, triplexes, and some of these neighborhoods that are predominantly single family detached homes. The family definition, which we just measured, getting away from PUDs and home-based businesses. So that's kind of the topics that'll be touched on in these existing neighborhoods. And we started the conversation really by asking, we have these existing zone districts. What are the new zone districts that we want to create? And so this is just a snapshot from a previous packet where we talked about the districts, the intent of those districts, what's the desired usage form, and had a lot of work happening around that. And then overall, we opted to kind of organize those new zones around neighborhoods, centers, and corridors and districts. So it separates them into those 3 broad categories. It's kind of a nod to the transect model that we talked about in form-based code. And it's trying to directly link it to some of the language and intent of the comprehensive plan. And so as it stands now, these are the zones that we're looking at. I think as we probably get through these, some of the names might change. We might think that we need to maybe combine a couple of them. There's probably going to be some changes that this group helps us make. But with the neighborhood zones, ones we included in the packet that we have ready to start talking about is the neighborhood 2 rural, the neighborhood 2, and the neighborhood 3. The numbers really correlating to the number of stories that we'd anticipate in those areas. We've talked about those a lot. Those are included in the last packet, and those are what we're going to show you today. So some of the key table changes. This is a repeat slide from the previous meeting. But just to kind of remind folks, like some of the key changes, because overall in these neighborhoods, we're not looking to reinvent them. We're largely starting from what the existing standards are and seeing what modifications perhaps should be made. And so some of the things that we're looking to explore would be minimum and maximum lot sizes, different encroachment standards. So those would be allowing certain things like porches and decks to actually extend into the required setback. Conditional uses. And so if there's a use that is allowed by right, but has certain conditions attached to it, then it would be a conditional use in this case. So an accessory dwelling unit has certain conditions. So that would be a conditional use. Short-term rentals. If there was a duplex on a corner lot, there would be a condition about the location of that duplex to a corner lot. And so that's a kind of a new concept that we're introducing into this code. Side street setbacks. So the Old Town residential zone has these. It's typically on the sides. All other zones generally just have one side setback distance, whether or not that's facing your neighbor or facing the street. And so the facing the street we've found was helpful in administering. I think in the Old Town residential, it's a pretty common thing found in other codes, and so it's something that we were looking to adopt citywide. And then we also wanted to do something to kind of solve a problem that you'll see in some of the duplex, at least one of the duplex examples that we show you this evening around interior setbacks for attached buildings. So this is a duplex on the bottom with a lot line going through the building. You have to get the modification through a PUD for a zero foot side setback, because obviously you can't have a 5-foot setback on either end with attached. So it's just something that will help streamline some of these applications and cause fewer headaches for everyone involved. Another one of the changes that we'd like to explore is the driveway width, particularly at the street level. And so thinking about this, the idea here being that from the pedestrian standpoint, we'd like to limit to an extent the length of a curb cut in some of these neighborhoods. And so this wouldn't require any property owner to come in and rearrange their driveway, but it would apply to new development that's built in the city, or if a house is torn down and redeveloped. And so what this would do would be, if it was a 3-car garage, for example, it would be neck down to 16 feet, I believe is what we're looking at now. Really for that, just more pedestrian scale environment. We'll also be looking at things around vehicle and pedestrian access. And so with vehicle access, kind of a nod towards some of the newer neighborhoods that we'll be looking to code for in just a couple of months of primarily prioritizing access from an alley, if an alley does exist. If not, then it would be from the front. And then pedestrian access. This is something that we haven't fleshed out at this point, but we'd like to have a conversation about how to enhance the connections between some of these houses and the pedestrian environment. Don't really know how that happened yet. I think Jeff,
It's more setting it up for the newer neighborhoods require some sort of connection from the front door to for some design element.
Yeah. Another design element we were going to explore would be around attached garages, ensuring that attached garages are either in line or step back to an extent from the primary structure, just to limit those garage forward designs to the extent we can, as well as potential standard that would limit the width of a garage within the first half of the lot to 30% width of that. And so really what we're trying to do is just what's the character that we promote and adding certain minor but maybe meaningful design. So with next steps with this particular topic, there are those other issues. So we're working on some home-based business standards now. There's alternative standards. So if we're moving away from a plan unit development framework, then we're looking to develop some alternative standards so that homes that have modifications under a PUD, they can still continue to exist without a headache, and they can expand and continue to enjoy their property. Definition of a family, which will likely be handled in the pretty near future. And then this group can probably help us decide whether or not now's the time to open up the discussion around neighborhoods or meetings as well. So overall, we're kind of looking for any input, suggested amendments to the draft code sections. To just pull up the code at the moment. So this was the code that was included in the packet. And you know, all of this is still in flux, but the neighborhood zones overall, we'd like to have a similar look and feel to all the zones, whether or not it's a residential neighborhood, commercial center, or open space zone. We'd like the layout of the code to look and feel similar so that it's just easy to navigate. And so it's probably a little bit hard to see this, but each code we would expect to have an intent and description section. So this would be a lot of the language here you'll see kind of tied back to the comprehensive plan. It's not regulations, but it is really our intent of drafting these codes should be in line with this intent description. There, you'll see a lot of applicability as you start getting more code sections. And this is important because certain code sections are only going to be applicable to certain types of applications or certain types of development. And so those will be included throughout the code. And then the way we've set it up here, and it's still in the discussion kind of with the consultants, is by the type of building that you want to build or building type. And so, for example, in this case, the neighborhood 2 rural zone would have the intent and description, and then it would have a house. So if you wanted to build a house, there's a description of what that is, the different lot standards, minimum lot sizes, widths, the height of the building, different setback information, and then any other requirements relating to design elements like maximum width of a driveway. And so you guys probably tell me if you want me to zoom in. And then there's a question of if it's not a house, but it's in these rural areas that we're just not anticipating yet, we would have a general building type that would have a default set of standards that would allow other things. So if a church was allowed in these districts, that would fall under this small school or something like that, that we would allow. It's kind of a catch-all. So just for ease of administration. And then it would close with the table on encroachments. And so in this case, zoom in a little, a porch could encroach into the front setback again to promote that design aesthetic of, that we were discussing earlier of 8 feet. Ramps could also encroach into the front setback by 8 feet. And then there'd be a list of permitted uses. And this list will likely grow as we kind of get through the process. Elsewhere in the code, there'll be a master table of every use that's allowed and which zones that they are allowed as well. But within these specific kind of zone cut sheets, we are just putting what's allowed. And that's in a nutshell how all of them at this point are kind of structured. And so as you move into other zones, there's different building types that come into play. This is the neighborhood 2 zone. This is really the residential core of the city. So there would be the house typology, but then you get into another with a duplex. And so in this case, there might be a locational standard. That's the condition and the conditional use located on a corner lot along a collector street or was in existence at the time the code was adopted. And so we're finding that in tables like this, it's probably going to be pretty easy to amend later on if we're seeing some trends in certain types of buildings and projects kind of coming back later and adding or tweaking some of these different standards. We're also hoping to get a pretty consistent set of models like this so that we can clearly show when a customer is looking at the code, okay, a lot area is K, and kind of find that in the actual diagram and say, okay, that's what they're talking about. And so this is just a snapshot from the Denver code, just to show perhaps what the step that we'll be moving towards. And then moving into the neighborhood 3, and again, this was in the packet, so we won't dwell on all the standards, but the palette of standards would increase more. So it would not only be a duplex, but then you would introduce a townhouse, a multiplex building, and so on. And so,
Yeah, and we're really not trying to copy the Denver code, but there were good graphics that we were able to give to the consultant saying, we want something of this quality that shows these types of things, so.
Is there somebody in the waiting room? You see at the top of the screen.
hi, Bob.
Hello, Phil.
Sorry, we didn't see you there. Hopefully you can see our screen and see all the smiling faces.
I do. Good to see your smiling face.
Yeah, anything you want to add, Joe? So I guess at this point, we're early on. We have the start of some actual code language for these areas, and just wanted to get your thoughts on, do you think this is heading in the right direction? Are there things that could be improved upon, specific standards that you wanted to talk through this evening, kind of knowing that we've already talked about these standards a good bit in the previous session?
Heard you right, it's transit oriented communities bill that's passed. Like, it's passed through the legislature, is that right?
Yep.
So it's going to go to the governor and he's gonna sign off on
Similarly,
it. Yeah. So I guess now we know it's going to be reality. And a lot of these things that we talked about that last meeting, radically different than anything we have on the table here. So I guess it seems like we're gonna soldier ahead and doing what we're doing. And then through the process as intended, and in the end, we're gonna do these basically overlays.
we don't know. We don't know. So the bill has changed quite a bit in the past month. And it's kind of shifted where things need to go with Lafayette. So we did advocate for some things in the bill that we ended up getting that are a positive benefit to Lafayette, like, it doesn't, we don't have to account for every qualified transit route up until 2050, even if it's not going to be implemented until 2050. So we got that concession in the bill, but what that will do is it'll shift which routes are going to be applicable in Lafayette, and we need to study that a little bit more. And then from that, it'll help inform strategies, and there's going to be a couple of different strategies. the bill is incredibly flexible, believe it or not, in how to implement it. So we can be strategic about where we want to try to accommodate density at the expense of other areas where we want to be more preservation focused. And, or we can do just a blanket overlay, but we want to explore what that actually means. And the way they calculate density is really complex as well. And so we need to be able to understand how that actually potentially could realize itself. And so until we understand the bill a little bit better, we're not sure how it will impact this, and we want council to weigh in too. And planning commission to weigh in as well, to provide us guidance with how we might seek to implement that bill. So, it's to be continued, but we're gonna keep an eye on it because it will definitely affect, it'll definitely affect the work that we're doing, but a lot of the work that we're doing could potentially be in alignment to some extent with what we need to do. And so, especially in the new mixed use areas and the new neighborhood areas. So, we just need to study it a little bit further. We stopped trying to analyze the bill when it was in flux too much, so.
Okay, we'll get some maps from the state in September, I think, that'll show the area that it's applicable to Lafayette. And then from there, it's really like a parcel by parcel analysis of the characteristics of it. And then within that, you can shift the density around. So you can focus it here on these specific sites, but leave these areas alone. And so that's gonna be the challenging part. It'll need to be a whole project around that.
Yeah, and it could be that it is some sort of overlay that enables additional options. Or it could be a completely different approach.
So but it's more South Boulder Road as opposed to like,
We think,
okay.
yeah,
Based on the last.
yeah,
meeting that
and
we
South
did.
Boulder Road wasn't even part of the initial conversation when the legislation was debuted, so. The BRT lines along baseline and Arapahoe, 287 with a focus. So we think there's been a drastic shift in what might qualify, what might not. And it could be also that there's strategic advantage because the bill allows you to do this in areas that don't necessarily meet the letter of the criteria and take credit for that. So there might be areas that are technically not within the geographies they're describing, but it makes sense for us to zone and take pressure off of other neighborhoods that we might want to explore as well. So, yeah, we need to get our heads around it, and understand and propose some scenarios for the groups.
We for not understanding the financial implication, is there any chance that the city would forego the transportation funds that come along with it?
That is a question that city council will have to grapple with because they did take away
That out of the bill.
they took away the financial penalties out of the bill. So what happens if we don't comply? So that's something that council will need to weigh in.
Are there any consequences for not complying as far as you can tell?
I don't know yet.
You don't get some funding attached to the bill.
We think it's very little, but we're not sure.
As a lot power.
Yeah.
I know it's better to be potential rabbit hole, but thank you at least.
Yeah.
Well, all the other bills too, all the other bills were gonna be addressed in some way with this project anyway, so we were in a good position to at least have those conversations, so yeah, that's a positive about it. I mean, it's fortunate for us in this.
So code, any ideas or thoughts?
I should have a question. You know, what is the vision for how this new, I don't know, zone districts or whatever we're calling them, neighborhood zones, how it applies to current, I understand it, for current existing developments, everything's sort of grandfathered in, or it might be that if there's, you know, a significant redevelopment in those that they comply with the updated code, is that right?
Yeah, our goal is to not make anything illegal. Like, if it was built, it's there. These standards might introduce some new things. So if a house was torn down, rebuilt, or there was an empty lot that was built on. But if there was a large scale redevelopment in some of these areas, it'll be a future conversation that might trigger some of these more form-based code requirements that we're talking about. but it'd have to be a pretty big project.
Yeah. Think about Marshall Fire, right? What's
Yeah.
happening there?
Yeah, that's
It's
the case, but like, I think what we were thinking is, so the intent statements for these existing neighborhood zone districts say they're for existing neighborhoods. And that they can accommodate a lot by lot redevelopment, but they're not intended for major redevelopment. So we'll end up putting a threshold in there that if like the lot size or the lot sizes cumulatively exceed a threshold, they have to rezone into the different zone district that has the full suite of things, and then there would be a public process with that. And everything.
So.
Is it so good?
It's
Man, it's hard to tell what is there that might have been there. What things would you say have been removed?
Nothing's that I think we've added. Or that we've removed. So one of the things, for example, in the comprehensive plan is an idea about transitions. And so, for example, in this townhome, apology, there's some language in here that we have buffer, so you're scaling buildings down to and then the design elements that we talked about. Vehicle access purposes. Otherwise, I think at this point, the question of the salt density on corner lots and collector streets, we kind of talked about that last time. We wanted to table that until we have the conversation about all the other residential, like the new residential areas, but that might inform what happens here.
You know, if you remember, we were getting into very specific design conversations around like, how should things be cited and all that. And so those answers probably will be reveal themselves with the new neighborhood work. And so we can probably just take that and plug it in and finalize the discussion. So we're just kind of putting it on hold for now. So we have better information and better design graphics, and then we can come back and say, okay, is this appropriate for the existing neighborhoods? If so, we can just plug it in.
I do have a question about the mechanical equipment AC condensers. That was a pretty big deal during the old town codes. And, you know, the thing about like people here, seeing things running, and it looks like that they would be allowed to push into the setbacks under this.
side street, side and rear.
So 2 feet into the side setback, which would be pretty close to another house. What's the thought behind that?
I mean, it's common.
Yeah.
And it's also,
Yeah.
if you consider acoustics, it won't make that 2 feet won't make a difference. You push it 2 feet away or something.
Now there's any more than that.
Well,
Yeah.
But if it's that could be something where if it worked well in old town, it should be revisited for some of the new
It
neighborhoods.
didn't work well,
Did not.
the issue. I mean, is there a way to mitigate noise somehow or something like that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It'd be challenging.
I mean, you're basically telling people. What's the limit of what they do. The other ones are just pushing it at the back only, which puts it in your limits. Forcing people to have a condenser right there.
Yeah, I think like even when you push it in the back, it could be on the corner, which is just
Still
again
flat.
2 feet. It's not gonna like make a difference. So, but we can explore like the sound aspect.
And there's certainly screening that you can put up.
Someone in a little house.
Yeah, I mean, it's.
That might not make it work.
So,
Let's mark it up.
looking at, if these are all just placeholders, are they set at the moment? Because the same setback. Role. Are they set? You know, just. Because they're already there, or because I'm just looking at a 3-foot setback.
Mhm.
You've got an opportunity to encroach, whether it's. a 4 foot setback. But another 3-foot setback, you know, property. And that's just 6 feet.
Yeah.
That's very urban. of its relationship. So, are you trying to encourage more density through this?
Yeah, so the standard side setback is 5 feet.
Right.
Yeah. And we're not changing that. And so, I think the only encroachment we might have added was the porch and the ramps, like ADA type stuff.
Sure.
And clarified them within there's differences within the front versus rear and the side. We made those clarifications. I don't remember if AC is in the correct code, but we can look that up.
I'm just trying to think about the fact that all of them have the same setback. Right.
It should be scaled by the,
Yeah, do you have what's your block?
at this point, they are the same.
Is the road 5 feet? Maybe that's something that we need to look. I do know like the standard.
Yeah.
Suburban ones are all the same, but
Yeah, so we know that they will change in other zones, like downtown, different.
Then the front, would you?
that's gonna be the alternative. Because we do know, like, well, Old Town's a great example, like each block has a different setback. But like the newer neighborhoods have different setbacks. We want to account for that.
Is there any definition, for decks in terms of height? Because I think
Yeah.
there's an impact, a visual impact is much different for a 1-foot tall deck off the ground versus a deck 8 feet.
Yeah, there will be. There will be.
Definitions are always, how are we change?
We haven't changed it yet, but that is gonna be a conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, we'll see a few examples. I'll explain that.
Yeah, I'm looking at this neighborhood too, with a 2.5 story max. Does that mean like garden level
Yeah.
or, because you can only be 27 feet tall? Yeah.
Yeah, is that 27 feet to the midpoint?
Yeah, and we'll define what the house will be. I think it's there. Yeah. But like depending on, like right now, we have a definition of height. We're not proposing to change it, but we're gonna have a conversation about Old Town because height, I think, is the key in Old Town. We don't want to end up having 5 different definitions or calculations for height. So if we come up with something that works in Old Town, it might be that we are able to propagate that for consistency across the city.
We don't have a lot of lots.
There's some. Yeah.
Yeah.
In Old Town, there's something or that,
What?
some
Yeah.
older lots.
Oh, no, you'd have to walk in.
So yeah, we're taking notes and then we'll make sure that we're telling you what the intent is, that this work is gonna be accomplished, and we'll make sure we follow up with that stuff. So
Is fencing excluded from this discussion on purpose, or is that just an oversight, or is that something we want to talk about as well?
Yeah, we will have fencing requirements in your code. I don't know if they would live in this thing.
Yeah, I wonder how maybe
Yeah.
the setback or variance from the setback applies to that.
It's a good question. In the table of contents we have right now, we have all these neighborhood zones that kind of group together, and then generally applicable zones or standards, so things that apply everywhere. So fences are everywhere, so they might.
Just sort of thinking about kind of what I see typical, right, fencing on the line, on the property lines, except maybe not on a side street if there's a setback.
yeah, there's a 1-foot setback from sidewalks in the current code. So like, we're jumping ahead a little bit, but our fencing allows 6-foot fences everywhere. Even in the front yard. So we kind of want to talk about that. That may not be appropriate. There might be areas where we want taller fences because of like compatibility with commercial or something like that. And we don't want to have to make people go through various processes to get that. They just might be something that we collectively say that, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we wanna have those things, we need maintenance standards, so when a fence starts falling down, we can go and say, hey, we need to fix this. So there's a little bit of tweaking in the fence section that we need to do, but it's not, it'll become somewhere.
What about privacy fences?
That's what we
Okay, because one of the lessons learned out of the Marshall Fire is that he's one of the big propagators of the fire.
Yeah, so we can talk about material standards against open space. Stuff like that.
There's no easy answer for that.
No. There isn't, but like, that could be a conversation that we have, like, I mean, the Marshall fire, the wind was the driver, but there's good lessons learned about materiality, especially on the interfaces with open spaces. So that might be a conversation we want.
But I just want to make sure I'm clear that we're not suggesting that the use of a fence might therefore impact other setback rules for other devices just because they're not. Of course, setback doesn't change because of the existence or.
No, no.
Understood. Thank you. So I understand, and it was pretty clear in the descriptions of the event too, and then three and so forth, that these standards are meant for lot by lot development or redevelopment, right? So that means if you get a lot and you want to tear it down and do something else in there, you have to follow the standards of any group. But if you acquire 3 or 4 lots, and you want to do something that is not now you don't necessarily follow entry zone, you can apply for a rezone. Is that all correct?
That's the thought process, is that if there's lot consolidation and redevelopment happening, there would need to be a process to enable that. It just couldn't happen by right.
Why would multiple lots now not have to follow N2 or N3, but they could petition to be rezoned? I mean, that's how a lot of parts of Denver become like they are.
Yeah.
It's totally different. Comes in its place. And we're spending all this time to define N2 and N3 and N2R and all kind of stuff. Why would the acquisition of multiple lots open the door for you to do something totally different? Rezonings are always up. And they most often go through. They're not disapproved that often.
So we would put criteria in place we haven't discussed that, but the thought is that there might be areas that do make sense to reconfigure and redevelop. And so what is the process? What are the criteria, standards that, and what is the public outreach process associated with it? So those are the things that we have to define.
But it makes sense to, it makes sense to whoever's invested. Makes sense. I mean, you say that,
But you can also buy 3 lots and just redevelop those 3 lots.
according to the existing.
Yeah.
Only, but if you want to up someone to build something bigger.
Yeah.
Denser.
Yeah.
Why is that door open if you have multiple lots?
Well, we don't know it's always open. That's what I'm saying. We don't know we need to establish the criteria that and define that.
And I think we haven't even had the conversation yet.
Okay.
So I think this, yeah.
If there's some kind of guidance.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Like one example could be like, our comp plan talks about height, where height is. And so if they're proposing something that's contrary to the established policies in the comp plan, then maybe that's an indication that it's not a permissible rezoning. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
You also consider what is sort of like an overlay. You may want the fenestration or the setback of that particular property to be in line with the existing question I have a different kind of design element to it, but still fortunately looks the same, so you're not going away from, what's on the street already.
Yeah.
You're just simply, you're not saying anything different about it, but there are things, there are elements that they say you must create the height from the street or from your baseline, whatever it might be, or what type of roof. Doesn't restrict you, it just means you're using certain elements to continue for the streets.
Well, what we were talking about earlier, the concept of transitions, limit to some extent
what you could do there if you decided you wanted to change zoning. So you could, in the middle of a residential neighborhood, if all of a sudden you got 10 lots, say, okay, now I'm gonna build an industrial building. Do that.
Could you build a multi?
Yes, and, yeah, and the, sorry, the implementation of the TOC bill might affect this too, right? It might be in an area that. But there's also a scenario where, like, maybe there's just, maybe there's larger lot, maybe there's like 9,000 square foot lots, and somebody gets two of them, and they wanna make it into 3 lots, but they still meet the underlying standards of the N2 zone district, then they can have 3 single family homes or whatever. There's that type of redevelopment.
But that's not a reason.
No, that's not a reason, yeah.
But as it stands right now, if I go and buy up, say, a block of public road, I mean, this really applies to commercial more than residential. So if I go buy a block of public roads, a big couple lots on based on. Right now, there's nothing, I don't think there's anything in our code that really guides when you can apply for an upzone.
Yeah, there is. It's
In
not
our-
a plan.
In our existing code.
Yeah, it has to be consistent with the comprehensive plan, so it's,
There's nothing hard written, not, you know.
Yeah.
It's
it's pretty standard.
an interpretation of the comprehensive.
No, if the land use typology is old town Main Street and somebody wants to rezone it to adaptable commercial. The map doesn't show adaptable commercial, you can say, no, it's not supported by the comp plan.
So that land use map is actually binding in this country.
That's a central
Yeah,
piece of it.
yeah.
I think a little too. I got here, I'm just looking at this one on 2, and it says like stories max to 1.5. Immediately I think about like maybe over.
So in everywhere except for Old Town, they're limited to 16 feet or, so it's like a story.
Yeah.
So we're not changing it.
So are people
What are
putting
they-
these on top of it?
It-
Only.
Yeah, there was a lot of conversation when we did those amendments about the character bulk. Which is some of the more suburban development that you're building a 2-story ADU. Alley buffer, and so we heard a lot of arguments on both sides. Keep it that it's fair.
Okay. I just wanted to go back and retouch on the height. Because I read in the stuff. In. See, people. Make big mound.
Yeah.
The cost of 27 people.
Well, it's not that bad, but
Well.
I get what you're saying, yeah.
We'll show you an example.
And you guys are doing that.
Yeah, we actually talked about it today. It's like one of the tweaks we want to recommend for the height is like, it's from existing grade and you can't. The only way you can alter existing grade is through like subdivision overlap grading, where you're establishing grade for the first, or reestablishing grade for the first time. So that would prohibit people from stockpiling and raising their house.
So grade though, based on drainage needed for that property.
Well, they still have to meet code.
Right.
But the height would be measured from the existing grade, not the finished grade. So they would still be able to alter the grades for drainage purposes, but they have to show the existing grade and measure that. That's something we want to propose. Because we do run into that occasionally.
Just reading through the documents. Usually. So. Like. In 2R, it says house includes an attached accessory dwelling unit. And then you go down table. It says accessory structure dwelling unit. So in my head, that's like saying. In one line. It's attached. Then below it's.
We need to, yeah, we need to change that to detached accessory structure.
I want to go back to the air conditioning. Does have an area for brown walls and mechanical equipment. And there. People, okay, we're going to do it. Let's just bring it.
Right, is it in the packet?
Yeah.
Okay, I wonder,
The summary of key issue with the issue.
oh, yeah, I think that was talked about, but not.
Yeah.
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 I believe it was.
Yeah.
Oh, is it? Okay. We'll take a look at it.
Should we go to the next discussion topic, the Old Town Residential, is that okay? with Sharon?
One topic that you was talking about on height, that definition of 27 feet, and I just am not as familiar with it, but how is it currently, calculated if you've got flat roof? You know,
It's to the, roof. I think the roof deck,
It's to the roof deck,
yeah,
and then if it's pitched, it's to the midpoint.
yeah.
So you could have 3 stories there.
It would be difficult. You have a character room that, and then you got to be at least a foot off. Or maybe about 8 inches, it would be difficult. So. Big story.
It doesn't have to different stories.
Why, right?
No, the number of stories is a new.
Yeah, it just seems like that's fraught with problems, and that you could have sort of something garden level, and then 2
You could already
stories.
have some. You could already do that, like a lot of new basements.
I would
But
be,
it's like-
that would be preferable to encourage garden level.
Yeah.
2 stories above, that won't be as tall as.
But what's to prevent people from just building?
That is something that doesn't happen now, but we should talk about it when we get to that point.
Well, this is a good transition point. We can move over to the next discussion item. So the Old Town Residential Zone District on our schedule for one of the upcoming zones that we'll be drafting with the consultant team. And so we're gonna come back to this slide at the end of the discussion to see if you have any input, ideas about certain things. But the idea with this particular zone was, again, to not reimagine the whole zone, but to acknowledge that there was a robust engagement process that happened in 2015 that identified a lot of key issues and drafted regulations to try to address those specific issues. Still, pretty fresh. And so the thought here was that we would examine like whether or not the regulations based on what's being built are adequately addressing those key issues, or if they need to be tweaked. So kind of tweaking is what thought was with this particular code. And so what we're doing now is really just trying to understand the key issues. And so we had some initial research on our end where we kind of went around, took some photographs, which you saw in that questionnaire. We had some internal conversations. We put some initial ideas in the memo for you to consider. And now we're here talking with y'all. We'd like to also have some external kind of focused engagement around perhaps some focus groups. We'll be talking to council in July. We'll have a booth out on Art Night Out later that this could be combined with some of the other code topics. And then potentially some sort of questionnaire and drop-in listening sessions for the item as well. And so,
Questionnaire for the general public.
yeah, so not sure yet. We kind of wanted to see how this conversation went, and there's only the extent of which we think the tweaks may happen, would probably dictate the type of engagement that we want to have with the community. So I think some folks were heavily involved in this process and could probably give a better summary than I would, or not probably would give a better summary than I would, but I believe it was in 2016, the Historic Preservation Board actually initiated a project with council to take a look at the regulations in the Old Town residential area to really tailor them to ensure that future infill projects were consistent and complementary of the Old Town residential character. Went through a process with the consultant team. Part of that was this diagnostic report that was done that identified 8 key issues that were that are noted here. So the side yard setbacks, being that development just felt too crowded or close to the adjacent homes. Lot coverage, meaning that the homes were perceived as just taking up too much of the lot. Ground mounted mechanicals, which we just talked about. The building garage orientation, so the side orientation potentially resulting in diminished privacy for neighbors, and detracting from the overall character of the area. Tree protection came up quite a bit. Massing and form, so the overall scale, massing, height and shading of neighbors. Architectural features and density and intensity. So what's the right types of buildings that should be promoted in the Old Town residential area? That project ultimately resulted in a suite of regulations that impact this overlay Old Town neighborhood overlay area. And within there's several different zoning districts as it exists today. The brown area is shown here as Old Town residential. There's several pockets of what's called transitional business. Some of those look and function probably a little bit like a residential area. They're also like along baseline. There's the dry cleaners. I forget what's next door to their office, perhaps. And then there's a single and two family zone district on the southwest as well. So that overlay, all the regulations apply to those properties within there. I think the initial recommendation also included that recommendation for the overlay to include the baseline as well. So we didn't adopt that. So we went back and looked since 2017 when the regulations were adopted, what's been built. And so just to highlight a few things, it looks like we've permitted 46 accessory dwelling units, which is pretty good and pretty higher than we thought. 18 duplexes and 12 new homes. This is kind of a really messy map that just shows where those are, with the blue being duplexes, the small house icons being accessory dwelling units. And then there's some other ones as well. We can always come back to this with residential additions, demolitions, and so on. And so our thought was with this questionnaire, and we appreciate everyone taking a look at it. We're going to go through kind of the different questions that you saw there and highlight what we heard from you through that questionnaire. The thought there was to look back at that 2017 effort at specific issues that the regulations were trying to address, and ask you all whether or not you think these projects are moving in that direction of addressing those things like spacing. Is it the spacing between other buildings, lot coverage or lot usage, the privacy character, sunlight, so on. So we'll go ahead and we have a number of just examples. And so the thought was we can go through those and just kind of pause for the group's discussion as well. I also have printouts of some of the raw comments that were just a bit too lengthy to include on a slide. So if anyone wants to see that, we have a few copies of that as well. So looking at some of the examples, so there's one home on East Geneseo. It was a new home built in 2017. I think there's some history to some of these buildings that some folks know about. And by the way, the questionnaire was completely anonymous. I don't know who wrote what. We have a sense of who wrote what in some cases. But so if you see your comment, want to expand further, please do so. So this was the before picture, the lot line being the fence to the right, and then the far end of that shed to the left. And then this was the building that was built in its place. You'll see here the picture, and I think someone actually noted this in the comment. The picture is a little hard to gauge how close the other buildings are. And so this was from Google Street View. This was from a car, and so you'll see, in looking at that, the house to the right may actually be closer than the required setback. And so some of those homes in this case are actually pretty close to it. But in just looking at what we heard from you all about this, so what the graph shows is the number of people who selected that picture exemplifies that particular item. And so does the spacing work? They would have selected that. And so in this case, one person clicked the spacing works. So in this one, it seemed that a lot of folks thought that the architectural style was heading in a good direction, and Lafayette eclectic. So that's not really a defined term, but it's something we hear a lot about. And so just starting with that conversation about what does that look like here. Comments here, won't want to read through all of them, but just around sizing and massing, privacy issue with adjacent homes. Some history around waivers to this particular property. I think it was approved right around the time the regulations were being adopted, so some of them may or may not have been followed. Footprint, size and privacy. Yep, so
Yeah, here's one comment. Yeah, this one was, people that were building it, they should have building. This thing was deliberating in this man. And so they got approval to just build the plan, which UD, so I think it conformed to the older codes, but did not do. Taller than it would be, if they wanted to build it now, it couldn't be quite as tall, it would have to conform to the plan.
This is the one that had more lot coverage.
Yes.
Yeah, it had a PUD, it had more lot coverage
So
when you count the ADU. Yeah,
So this one doesn't quite conform to everything, but
Yeah.
it is a good example, it's pretty typical in construction. But the other thing I wanted to ask is you have the graph up there, it says 2 people thought this and 4 people thought that. How many responses did you end up getting?
12 total responses to the questionnaire. So given that, there were some high marks, full style, a little bit of high marks in privacy, character, and lot usage. Anyone want to expand on this of things that came to mind when you were?
I think it's a good illustration of existing properties adjacent that are not conforming and how something that does conform, or maybe that's come closer to conforming, it's still gonna look a little bit more.
I really liked the questionnaire. I really did. It was a lot more challenging than I thought it would be, because it's so context dependent upon the neighbors. Especially with regard to height. That really makes a difference. So it wasn't as easy of an exercise as I thought it would be. But I thought it was.
Yeah, it's hard to decipher, is it gonna impact sun? Is it-
About privacy, like, okay, looking at windows and porches.
Yeah, and it's going to impact that neighbor building now for in terms of privacy, but when that gets redeveloped, whenever.
Yeah, and I spent an inordinate amount of time looking at the Google Street View.
Yeah.
You know, scrolling around and zooming in and trying to look down. Yeah, and so like with this one on the left, building on the left is sort of gives you one point of perspective versus that, right? And so really was a challenge, like, you know, how does this? It wasn't just this one, but trying, you know, there's another one where when I use the Google Street View to look across the street from the house, you had a whole different kind of neighborhood than when you were just looking at the house and the, you know, the adjacent. It's an interesting exercise, but it's a lot of work.
So, I just had a question about what sets that. We're setting that height, you know, we're talking about that. On that very domestic pitch 412 versus new one, which is a little bit steeper. But that domestic pitch has an impact on how you actually experience it. Whereas this one is trying to tell you that there's something else happening, there's a pitch, but that is how we actually allow or style to inform the street, or to say what's there is going to. Once you put a domestic pitch on this new project, it changes that project. So what are the driving factors?
And that leads into the height. In the same vein, that adjacent house on the other side, yeah, it looks like this new house is overshadowing it. But then we have to ask, well, is that the kind of layout that we want to perpetuate? And how many houses, yes, it's going to overshadow, pulled out to a setback that might be more cohesive with the rest of the street.
is this taller than 27 feet? I seem to remember they got up.
The previous.
I don't think it is. I do think that there's some improvement in it, like a little bit.
Yeah.
There was an error with, there's the wall plane. thing. So there was a minor error with that, but,
Yeah, so 35%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge with the Old Town is so many of the buildings in the Old Town area are so small. And that just doesn't fit with a modern, like, family conception of space. And I think that incentivizing construction that's more on a scale that's appropriate. Building might be, there, maybe there's some way to offer an incentive, like maybe it's additional lot coverage if you're staying under, at one level or 1.5.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, we have that for situation.
there's three of them, I think, and one of them is, but it's only a 5% bonus, I believe. I mean, hold on, I have it pulled up.
I think it's in 1 or 2.
So one of the
You get 2
consultant-
trees.
One of the consultant recommendations was to decrease the lot coverage to 25%.
Oh, wow.
And then rely on the incentives to try to get it back up to 35%. So that was another thing, but it's pretty low.
Yeah, that was one thing that came out of that process, that was not approved by city council. But I think, overall, my impressions on this one, but the house on the left is not typical Old Town. It's right up the lot line. It's kind of a 2-story, sort of boxy, low pitch. So it's much of the impact of the center house on its neighborhood, on its neighbors is much more typical on the right.
Yeah.
You have, and that house absolutely dominates the house on the right. I know that people that live in the house, it really dominates almost that. Kind of overwhelming.
Well, and those little boxy things on the side. I mean,
Remember
they're,
the privacy issue there.
yeah,
But how do you rectify that from where we sit? That's
There-
really difficult to do.
There's no way to do that. There's no, like, when you have buildings next to each other, you're gonna
Yeah.
there's limitations to what you can do. So,
We can go to the next one. The other one is actually also on East Geneseo Street. It was built a little later in 2020. This is the before image. This is the after image. That's from Bill's car. It was hard to get a good, so this is a similar thing when there's a single story, smaller building on the right side there, the blue building. And then a story, it looks like the street elevation is going down a little bit towards the left, where there's the 2-story there. This is another thing where when we're talking about our height measurements, where our existing
grade got completely.
our existing grade, it's measured from existing grade, so if you look at where it's graded to with that porch, and then it goes up to the middle point of the roof. And so, in this case, I just out of curiosity, they do have a finished basement, and so that there might be certain things, there could be a finished basement that goes into some of those decisions. Could also be that, they wanted some more positive drainage away from the building because it's pretty low, the lot's pretty low and flat. So there's probably a mix of valid reasons to do that, but this is what our current code does allow. Some of the downsides to that is you see a retaining wall there, you see the pitched roofs really aggressively pitched, and so on. But where did y'all come out on this? So 8 folks like the architectural style. And then the spacing and the privacy and character seem to get better marks than the previous one, as well as the lot coverage. But there were comments in the other category about it just being too large and out of character to the neighboring properties, kind of overwhelming it. So kind of some similar feedback to the one we just saw.
Is the alley higher in the back?
I can't see a reason why they would do that unless the alley was.
I mean, there is some grade change, but you can see it. There's like a low timber retaining wall on one side, and there's probably something similar the other side, but what they, like, and I went and checked the existing height definition. Yeah, height definition is from established grades, not existing grades. And so they reestablished the grade around their house. I think Phil was right to bury
Yeah.
the elevated basement, which is, that the basement's being partially exposed is a pretty standard building technique. But here they chose to raise the surrounding grades, and that resulted in higher retaining walls, stuff like that.
And they may have done that to eliminate water issues in the basement. But it was reported that was not friendly. Yeah, they didn't. put excavations in.
But if we were to change it to established grade, then that might have pushed the whole structure height down slightly. These, I imagine they're beautiful, but that second story has a really tall roof going on, so.
That's
I
a-
find it interesting that, feel like look at the proportion of the windows. They're double the proportion on the other side. The window and up, it would be that. You look at the hip, so going back. So it's not like it's one for one, or like sort of the kind of like. It's acknowledging that there's some much window in there, but unfortunately, I'm trying to understand it. So, but I'm just trying to say that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the siding, the neighbors.
Yeah, I mean, this one, it was like they may have actually read. I mean, this was actually started by another fellow who built the foundation, and then other people bought it, finished the house with it. But that's neither here nor there, but, in the final product, looks like they may have actually read the old town design resource book. It architecturally, I mean, its size is fairly large. Again, but its architecture is not, I mean, I can think of 100 other houses that are really more out of keeping than this one. This one to me really highlights the grading, because if you look at the picture, the before picture, it makes the grade on Cleveland Street there, or Geneseo, seem less than it is. It looks flat. No, there's actually a grade, but this is the vantage point of the new house makes it look worse than it is. So there, the street does do this a bit, but if you look at that stone staircase, this is a flat walk going to the front door. If you look at the stone staircase on the new one, that's about a good 4 meters. I mean, it's that house is up there, and that's
I think the existing grade thing has to become, But I can see needing to make changes for to add soil or to, get positive drainage, but you still have to calculate the height.
Is anyone opposed to exploring the existing grade definition?
Roll, I think it's good, but right, normal development, new developments, I would say.
Yeah. Unless it is part of subdivision overgrading planned, yeah.
And if there's a part to that, I mean, our building official really, and I don't know if this is codified or not, but he really wants to see a 10% grade over the first 10 feet away from the house. So that's okay, that's required. So that's what. But to have 4 feet is another matter entirely. And then the height thing does have to account for a house on the slope, you measure from this side to that side, you all know that, but I really think the height is.
Yeah,
The grade.
yeah. That's what we focused on, like, they manipulated the height, and that ended up raising the entire building. And that had impacts on the neighboring properties from that perspective. I'm also curious about the transparency on this, because I think they're supposed to be between 30% or something like that.
Windows are.
Seems a little small.
First story.
Yeah.
Weird.
And just to play devil's advocate a little bit here. I mean, I don't think anybody would necessarily, but maybe a posing question, be opposed if they wanted to excavate down, right? And have retaining walls on their property so that they could have a taller building, but they were stepping down into it as opposed to stepping
That
up,
would,
because it brings the massing down.
it potentially does, but,
Like City Hall.
yeah, I mean, well, the roads around here are built up with constant buildings to get But, there's drainage issues with that.
Yeah,
I mean-
full site sump pit.
Yeah,
We don't, can't control building decisions, but I mean, I think what we're responding to here is the visual impact.
Yeah.
Created by this choice.
yeah,
Can you just quickly define what you mean by existing grade for those of us who aren't planners?
so existing grade would mean there, right?
Okay,
So, unaltered survey grades before any site work is done. And then Mike's point, like on new neighborhoods where they're overlap grading, the existing grade would be after the overlap.
restart.
Yeah.
Before construction happens
Yeah.
and after grading.
Yeah, and there might be a thing that we need to say that grades need to tie in at the property line as well.
A typical residential project, you won't hire a civil engineer, whereas new development, you're gonna get a civil engineer, you're gonna regrade and drain and retention ponds and all that.
And are you talking the street and the alley, or is it both, like four corners, existing grade? Is it generally flat? In Old Town, there's not a lot. Because really, you're starting at your things to be considered too.
Yeah, so, yeah, look, on the height, right now, it's measured from any point on the grade. So it's very precise, which is, it's too precise. And so when we come back and talk about height, not only when we're talking about existing grade, we want to talk about establishing points. And like maybe being consistent without a building code measures height as well, so we don't have two different standards within two different code documents. And so we'll come back and throw all that together for this group for a conversation.
In other words, we should move on. Right?
Yeah, yes, it's gonna be a good conversation. I think we need it.
This one, Cannon Trail, subdivision, 7,000 plus square foot lots, approved in 2021, this was undeveloped. No,
Now those,
Cleveland. Yeah. Cleveland. Yep, this one got higher marks spacing, so they're pretty well spaced out from each other. Lot usage, privacy character, low marks in architectural style. But so interesting that low marks in the architectural style, but higher marks in the Lafayette eclectic, which is the subjective term that I'm trying to define. So I don't know if I read that.
Eclectic because they're different.
Yeah,
I mean, for me, the Lafayette eclectic, I don't wanna see a Old Town that's just mimicking, mimicking existing houses, because that's never been.
mhm,
Old Town was like you built your house in the style that it was when you built it, you know? So what I liked about that is that at least these are different styles, they're modern styles, and I think that's important.
mhm.
Right.
Freaky mod.
new mid-century or something.
Yeah, it's a deep derivative of, right? I don't know. I see wide overhangs.
Any comments before moving on to this one?
This is the one, if you turned in the Google Street View across
Yeah.
the street is very small, typical.
Mhm, yeah,
um,
Yeah.
townhouses.
I mean, this,
So these were developed. What if the one on the right was pre-existing and the one on the left?
that's a good question.
it also feels to me like they're a little pushback. They do too much. Setback is almost too much.
I mean, there's a small lot, and they've got ADUs in the back. There's almost
Yeah.
no backyard to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are the Cannon Trail.
I think they are.
They've got-
These
You
are
think
the
they're
custom,
7,000?
These are.
they have to be, I think. But yeah, the front setback does seem large.
These are on the west side, the foot was extended straight through. So initially, that whole area was looking to zone in duplexes. And people said, wait a minute, there's no transition for the houses
Oh,
already
yeah.
there. So they said, okay, and then instead of duplex, it'll be single family. They took that single family definition and ran to town.
Transition from.
That's true. Same.
One on the right is one, I think the ADU in the back is 2-story. The primary dwelling in the front is a 1-story building. I can only think since 2015, whenever the 17, when the overlay district came into being, I can only think of 2 other 1-story builds in Old Town since then, of all the, you said, you put the back apartments that are 18 houses and 12 duplexes and then. I can only think of 2, maybe 3, including this one, that are actually 1-story. So what that tells me is that the incentives that we try to include there to incentivize people to build, mainly by increased lot coverage for building 1-story, have not really been working. And I understand why, because if you can build a 2-story house at 30% lot coverage, or a 1-story house, 35% lot coverage, where you're getting your return on investment, which is all that matters really. Well, most of the time is much more if you have the same footprint, but doubled.
Is it
You know,
5%? I don't think it's.
It is.
It's 5%.
So it's just in terms of the incentives, and I know we're going on topic, but I think this is an example, like, there are so few new 1-story builds in Old Town that the incentives are not,
It's a good point.
It would be
not much
interesting,
of a carrot.
and I know it'd be more work, but it would be interesting to compare stats on, square footage, how many are 1-story, 2-story, of those, lot coverage of the permits that have been issued.
I think it's a really good point. That's probably most are 2 stories.
Is that something, like, it's come up twice, now. Is that something we want to explore, is like, is the ratio, incentive ratio right?
I think it makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, I would say 90% plus of the new builds are 2 stories.
Yeah,
And I know that,
And 90% or maybe 80%, I don't know. But we'll see inverse. The existing houses in Old Town are large. Also,
and I remember talking about Louisville, they have a 40% lot coverage. I remember it being a lot higher.
Yeah.
Debating, is that really, and then you should look at the images of Louisville homes. If you push to, 40% at 1-story.
Just down the street, around the corner, in Trout, so they have the single and 2 family zoning, built 2021 and 18 lot subdivision. I think everyone's familiar with this development. Probably don't need to, so go right to the, I tried to summarize some of your comments. I think some of them I didn't, for timing. High marks on kind of sunlight penetration, slightly lower in lot usage, privacy and size. Yeah, so I think one of the themes that I kind of recall through this is that one of the comments talked about the modern farmhouses fitting in within their development, but not necessarily interacting well with the surrounding area. Yes, yep. Yeah. There's some other things that we have things about if we were to do it again, the street versus a street map, like that. Also a comment I'm on these higher density doesn't necessarily mean more affordability. So
I'm trying to remember.
Pretty big basement.
They have basement.
The developer projected when they were building these things, that their sale price was roughly 600,000 per site.
Yeah.
They're going
It
for
was like 1,900 square feet.
I thought they were between 15 and 2,000. 1,500 and 2,000 or something like. There was a,
Well,
yeah,
official plan was 1,900 square feet. So must change.
one thing when you're thinking about an entire row redevelopment like this, with the kind of new zone district, new neighborhood zone district, one of the things that we want to employ is a variety of housing types. And so on a block like this, it might say you need 3 different housing types. You need different porch standards, things like that, to some variation. So I think that's one thing that we recognize is maybe lacking a bit in this one.
Do you think that the new proposed code are these the uniformity listed?
The hope of the new neighborhoods, because we're able to have a standard that says that requires certain verification on lot.
Oh, I mean, I guess.
Well, that's what we need to explore. Like, that's gonna be the big thing about the new neighborhoods is like, what is the right mix?
Mhm.
Like, what is the right diversity standard that we need to do on a per block basis or neighborhood wide or something like that, so.
This one, I think too, is the parking issue. I mean, they're one car garages. If you drive down that street, it's all cars on that side. Everybody is, and because it's not a regular width street to start with, because it was an alley, it's really hard to drive down that street. And so, I mean, I'm in favor of less parking, but something like this, I don't know how you overcome that. There's no
Yeah.
other place for them to park except on the street.
Yeah, well, I mean, street parking where it's accommodated is not, I mean, it's there for people to park on the street, so.
Right.
But yeah, there is a lot of cars, this is easy for us to say in hindsight, but if the alley were the alley and there were a street where the street wanted to go, you could do probably more than just single car detached garages or attached garages along the alley, and accommodate some more parking, and you could also have just better relationships with the streets. Like, there's a lot of lot there devoted to a parking space on the driveway. And so if you had like single story detached garages, you could probably get 3 or 4. And they're along the back alley frontage, and then have just much better street activation on the other side of it. So
It'd be interesting to see what how big are the backyards? They look pretty small.
they are, yeah, they
They
are.
are then?
Well, burn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure there was a calculation in this case.
Yeah.
Do we want to live in the front or do we want to live back?
Yeah.
In the front, they're looking at mobile homes.
Garages.
And garage.
Looking at it because it's in this.
So they're
Big office and then it's
closing
like-
thoughts on this.
Yeah.
Bob.
Understanding that this is an Old Town overlay. And primarily we're dealing with infill opportunities. How many more opportunities for a street long development like this are there? And if that's the case,
Not in Old Town. Well, there, actually, that's not true. There could be one in Old Town. Yeah,
It's Marshall.
Yeah.
yeah.
Well.
I can think of some other.
There's open space and trail behind there. It's not just. In property line, I remember correctly.
It's a utility.
But there's no trail.
There is a utility, I'm trying to remember. the-
Yeah.
Little roll behind the mobile home development. Yeah, it's not a trail.
This is called the Cannon Trail because he wanted to make a trail along the sidewalk with all sorts of different plants.
Mhm.
You know, but cool.
We said no.
I guess I have one final thought on this. I mean, unless somebody gets a hold of a bunch of lots in a row, and scrapes them all, or God forbid, you have fire or something like that. I can't think of any places in Old Town where an opportunity for 30 houses really exists. But I would say though that this and the next example, which is on West Elm Street, show you a glimpse into the future of what Old Town could become. I mean, entire neighborhoods in Denver have turned from Old Town-ish into this, and happens one lot at a time. And for example, even if you only have, people talk about, oh, we gotta look at the velocity of how many houses we're losing per year. That's yes. If we're only losing 5 per year, well, still, that means maybe in 150 years it's gone. Because there's only so many, about 1,000 or so. If we're losing 10 per year, it can take 80 years. How many is this? I realize that got this whole sort of thing, but around Denver and Boulder, this doesn't give us a glimpse into the future. These are not bad houses. We're well built and so forth, but they're not. Well, we have an old house. So that's.
On Elm Street, home on a vacant lot, 2019. This is on the very north end of the overlay area. So infill development. It's the project. Some good comments on this one. People were saying size and height seems appropriate, spacing, privacy and character, low marks on the architectural style, effectiveness. I'll let you read this one. So just saying.
Well, yeah, that's like, oh, that's obviously mine.
Yeah. Um, So one of the things I could just maybe point out is that the current code does have an encroachment in this area for the front porches to encroach beyond to the setback. In this case, it's really the garage that's out front, and you can't really see the porch. And so I think that's one of the things that we're talking about in previous discussion about wanting to encourage that more and provide people more opportunity to do that.
And it's interesting to see that people did not appreciate this architectural style. Combination garage doors. I don't think there's anything wrong with this. In terms of living in Old Town.
It's also pretty unique in that it's great views of the open space. Really wasn't anyways.
Is it? No, there's no how.
Any other thoughts before moving on to the next one? Oak Street, I think this was, Mark's. Review over probably. This one got high marks mostly all around. It, So-
A lot width of that one, I mean, roughly, like.
corner,
I think it's
So
pretty big.
so I want people to be aware of the variety of depths. We really impact these regulations. A nice big side, and it's a corner lot.
Corner lot has a bigger set. Facing side, so it does.
But then that influences.
And this one, they actually didn't build somewhere they could.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you remember that, I mean, that was sporty, but then, I mean, I think there was a lot of concern what was gonna be there, and I mean, they did a really great job. And it's still a big house, you know, with an ADU, but they were considerate of, you know, the rest of the.
Now looking at corner lots being triplexes, quadplexes. So,
Yeah, yeah,
And they're already allowed here. Well, duplexes are. That's where the idea in those other areas would be to keep the same similar size massing as what's allowed elsewhere, but just the internally, it would be duplex.
So the lot coverage may not increase.
Yeah. So we wanted to pretty much blend it.
It's a bigger lot. So
Yeah, so there,
lot coverage would be greater.
and it would probably be. So I'm hearing that this is a pretty good example. It seems to fit a lot.
This is kind of leading into the ADU discussion. Point out that this ADU on top of what looks to be a garage, is not a giant, you know, square box that towers over everything. And we'll see another example like that.
And this is this matches.
This is probably smaller. But I'm kind of curious to like do an inventory of this
Yeah.
lot, see what the stats are on it. That's like a one and a half story. Yeah,
The dormer, can have just a huge effect on livability.
yeah.
So if you can hold that gable end on each end and have a dormer, it really, it holds the massing down, but it still allows.
Not that it. Philip and Donna were my tenants. They stayed in my house and then they built it. And they were wonderful people. They were very concerned about making sure that their house was scale and it did also. And the ADU is really nicely sized. I think it was 570 square feet on the inside, so it's not huge.
Come in the studio.
The one bedroom for the
One bedroom.
Nicer.
So from the question is, can you determine what feels more in character with Old Town? Height issues or lot coverage?
I think they're both, like there's one. I don't know if it's in the slide deck, but like one of the things on the ADUs is. We've got, the predominant housing form in Old Town is single story, but then you allow a 2-story ADU. And it's out of whack. And then we also, like, these are big lots, like the typical lot in Old Town, 50 by 140, that's a big lot. And with a big building envelope, and I know we have some mitigating design features, but you can still get a pretty massive structure in there. So, one thing we wanted to talk to the group about is like, establishing, like, the front part of the lot, you do 2 stories, but the back part of the lot, you do 1 story. And like further refining the bulk plane, and then maybe incentivizing ADUs like this or single story ADUs. With maybe a bigger lot coverage on that. So you don't get the imbalance with the main home in the rear end. Like even with a 2-story home, a 2-story ADU is still pretty big.
Yeah.
And the way the height is measured, people aren't doing this. This is like, I would call this a 1.5 story. If we were to define it, we could probably quantify it, but people are taking the massing up and then doing very shallow pitched roofs
Yeah.
and still meeting the thing, but so the structures are very bulky and flat. And that's not the roof pitches that we do see some of that, but all of the roof pitches are a little bit steeper than, so.
Since you brought it up, I mean, this is something I flagged to further incentivize single story ADUs by exempting them from the lot coverage calculation. I mean, Seth, correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea was to not have massive houses. So if you can have 30% in your house, that's 2,100 square feet times 2, that's 4,200 square foot house with an ADU behind it. And I don't think that was what anybody asked for, right?
Well, I mean, I think the bigger picture is an accessory dwelling is supposed to be or accessory structure is supposed to be an accessory structure. It's supposed to be subservient to the primary building. In many cases, that's exactly the opposite. I think I appreciate you proposing some ideas in there to try to, and I have some other ideas as well, but yeah, it is kind of a thing that, but according to the code, the way you get the most, again, trying to optimize your return on investment, having a garage with an apartment on top of it is very popular, and I think, and I understand why. It's not my cup of tea, but I understand why. And in order to put as big of an apartment on top of the garage, you go straight up as high as you can, and then you do like this. And that's why people live it.
And the other thing,
But it's not an accessory.
yeah, I wanted to ask why you're thinking 2 stories in the front and 1 in the back, because that's the opposite of what the overlay was trying to accomplish. That you'd have your
Scale down in the front.
right, and then and so from the street, it still looks small. And
Then
then,
we run into that privacy issue.
yeah, so what is the thought of 2 in the front, 1?
I mean, there's no magic to this, but like, it's more traditional building. It's like, you do have, the bulk on the front of the lot, and then whatever's in the rear yard, rear yards are typically bigger than the setbacks allow, but whatever's in the rear yard to allow sun and light penetration into the backyard is typically a lower scale. So like detached accessory structures are limited to 16 feet in height. And they're allowed to be closer to the property lines in some cases, because of that. And then you have valley loads back here. So it's a good conversation to have, but like, people are building 2-story homes. That's the default. I don't know how successful pulling back on the lot coverage for two-story homes would be, I think the success is gonna be the other way around, is like maybe the incentive is wrong or not right sized. But knowing that people are wanting to build two-story houses, would you rather have a two-story house that is concentrated on the front of the lot or one that goes the entire length of the lot, even if it moves in and out of, the wall plane moves in? Because that's what we're getting, is we're getting long, tall structures.
First few houses.
Yeah. And you'll see more.
Yeah.
But I mean, that changes the character of Old Town in that in the past, at least it was mostly one story
Mhm.
on the front.
Yeah.
So
We,
I don't
we have some good
I mean,
examples
it's
of that, and we have
okay.
some really poor.
Well, in Denver, they've got the rear lot line, the rear,
Yeah,
like,
Sixty-five,
that-
35.
what's that?
65, 35.
Yeah,
where It's measured where
Yeah.
you can only build to a certain height when you pass that 65%.
so even if you wanted to like have a bigger house, it still scales it down. Like you can still have a one story, you can still have a pretty big house, but at least part of it, where typically people have rear yards, is scaled down. So it's not as impactful on the rear yards.
I think what you're saying, which I really want to validate, is just because that's typical, that's not what's here. What's
Yeah.
here is tiny house.
Yeah.
And then people, as they have money, build something bigger.
Hmm.
And I, so
so
I think
then,
Vicky's bringing a good, what might be what's happening other places, is that what we want?
so then do we begin to incentivize a lower scale in the first, here's the front setback, here's the next X% of the lot.
Mhm.
Does that stay below a certain height? Then you can do your two-story area. So that you can maintain that form on the top. Maybe you don't allow two-story.
could we, I'm thinking.
Well,
of it
this is
weird.
where we're, yeah, no, we can,
Could we incentivize if you step down your second story?
yeah,
And,
we can do a couple of different scenarios
yeah,
and like just like modeling scenarios, just to kind of explore these.
Or for ADUs, like doing ADU as a single story, because not everybody wants an ADU that has stairs. A lot of them are related to accessibility, older parents, that sort of thing. Incentivize, allow them a bigger footprint, allow them more lot coverage to do a single story or separate detached building.
or they could have, I mean, you mentioned that one time they could have a separate garage and then they. Yeah, so, cause I can understand that people want a garage
Mhm.
and an ADU.
Yeah,
So,
or maybe the 20 feet is not right, maybe the, like, so.
Hmm.
I think we want to explore this stuff with the group. It's like, these are like, what's working and what's not working and what incremental tweaks can we make, maybe get a better outcome that makes more people. Believe that the intent of what was initially trying to be accomplished is actually being accomplished.
We have a few more to get through. I'd like to be able to show you all what the questionnaire kind of results were on these. So just wanted to highlight just a few duplexes. This one is on the corner of Baseline and Foot, new duplex in 2018. So this is Foot looking east, Baseline, you see through the trees on the left. So this was the old house. This is the duplex that was built in its place. So this is still looking the same direction. There's a north unit that includes that garage. So the demarcation line between the two units is the right side of that garage. Kind of walking, kind of sidestepping to the right. The south unit there, the parking in that case is accessed through the alley, through that, into that garage. So they have the kind of backyard here. Was interesting, I thought that looking on Baseline, the old house was kind of mimicked this new house. I don't know if it was completely torn down and rebuilt or.
They,
isn't that the one where they kept the, yeah.
Yeah,
they said they were gonna preserve the wall and then they kept it and then they reframed it on the
Yeah.
inside and then reframed the outside, so.
either way, it's interesting. Yeah, so,
This is almost, that side profile is almost like what we were just talking about, where it's low on the front, it steps up in the middle, and then actually steps down in the back. All this.
Didn't they get better setback by keeping that front? Yeah,
They
they kept that front wall and kept
So
the existing
It's a good
shorter
example of if
setback.
an incentive is not gonna work or is gonna be, you're gonna find a loophole
Mhm.
or, oh, oops. knock it down.
There's nothing.
So this one got pretty high marks with everything but the architecture. Eclecticness. There were some pointed remarks about it and a renovation, concerned about a lot of setbacks. So in this case, it's a pretty long building, staying at a generally a reasonable height for baseline going up. So this is maybe an example of something that the last discussion a minute ago was.
Well, this is a question I have too, because the original house base baseline, this one now faces foot, so we can build more. I mean, and this is something that I flagged, we can't see the house next to it on baseline, and if I remember correctly, it's blooming over it.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, an issue, although it is 2 stories. But that, I think that's an issue when the orientation changes on a corner lot. That needs to be taken into.
I see on the baseline.
Yeah.
Really one face.
No, I'm not saying that they can't face the other way, but I think it has to take into account that it used to be, now all of a sudden you've got a big 2-story wall next to the house that maybe there wasn't before, next to the other house, you know, on baseline. And that came up again on the west end one.
This one is a duplex on Geneseo. This was 3,300 square foot lots created. This did have PD modifications, so they had to get a modification for that 0 line interior setback, as well as some additional limits that were placed on the PUD about no more dwelling units and no more than 1 per lot. This one, the lot is interesting in that there's no alley access. So it's actually smaller than some of the other lots in Old Town.
It was subdivided.
Yeah. Well, in this case, that house on the left there is not part
Right,
of it. Yeah. So
and they had to move the sewer line and the.
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah, and so this was the original, and then this was the duplex that was built in this place. There's a garage to the left for that unit that you see, I'm assuming, on the left, and then there's also one to the right. So kind of going around towards the right, this was the original house. And that's what it looks like today. Looks like similar, the garage kind of demarcates, separates the units, which from some perspective. So I'm assuming that's helps not having a shared wall with the neighbor community. Overall, this got pretty good spacing, character, lot usage. And then there was a concern that it overshadows the house to the east. Which again, unfortunately, the photo doesn't show. Looks like you can kind of see it there to the right. A 1-story building.
It seems set back too far. Right. That's probably because of. Then that begs the question, do you allow a curb cut basically if you're not on the alley?
Yeah, if we're talking about duplexes elsewhere in the city, like.
Yeah. It has, I mean, it may not have a curb cut, but it has. a driveway. Which is not something you can see.
Yeah, I don't know what the rest of the block setback is, but there is kind of a block sensitive setback allowance in the code. And if they're all closer, this duplex could have been shifted theoretically, which would have given them more room in the back to do garages off the back if they take one
They
driveway.
could have just taken that pad and put it, but then since they don't have that alley, now they don't have that alley.
Yeah, the driveway, they could have created a quasi, like,
Yeah.
back driveway.
And from a standpoint, the garage keeps a common wall so that you can't near each other, so the design point.
So
Which is
fire
attractive.
separation.
Yeah.
Has to be a fire.
Yeah, yeah, you gotta have an hour rated wall between the dwelling
Bigger back
spaces
space.
in a garage.
Right.
Your house, is not that, but it doesn't allow the sound. Sound
I know.
So, do you have a thought?
So this is reconstruction, which is,
Shared driveway.
how did it exceed 30% lot coverage?
question. Thirty-two is allowed. I have to go back to the PUD modification.
Or is it
Oh,
L
it's, lot coverage isn't.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at the approvals.
Is there anything in the code that allows for the smaller than typical lot?
Any other thoughts on this one before we move on to the next final duplex of the night? This is on West End Street, replaced a single family home. I believe the units are about 25 each. The lot coverage here is only 22%. So here's the, this is on Emma looking south. This is the original home. It's duplex that replaced it. So still fronting Emma. This case, to the right there, around the back, around to the right is the parking. This was just under construction.
Right here.
So, learned about, comment about it being larger than necessary. The spacing, so larger lot, kind of set back a little bit more to the street, so spacing was not surprisingly a high mark here, as well as lot usage character, low marks being the eclecticness.
I guess what I'd say about this one, it is a bigger lot, it's a gigantic building. This meets the code. So. Not that anyone has, but you're past the whole, but like district is too restrictive, I mean. That is a gigantic building. That is, and then that, there are no other buildings over, you know, historic age in Old Town that are anywhere remotely close to this building. And that's true for every duplex that shown. So, I know, you know, you can't force people to build exactly what someone like me wants, but none of these buildings are reflected in any way of the neighborhoods that they build.
One of the repeat things I'm seeing is just that big setback, and a lot of the Old Town setbacks are very short on the front.
Just for the massing here, top.
Yeah, just maybe do that a little better. Almost what that one on baseline was trying to do by keeping them on the side.
I mean, that is maybe it wasn't done very elegantly, but they did achieve that, breaking down the massing and making it a little bit. It's
There's slight
A little bit, yeah.
variation.
baseline, I think the one on baseline was a little more successful in breaking down. This is a little more.
But yeah, this is an example, again, of switching the orientation, because that thing that's sticking out is a garage, and then there's another garage back behind it, and then there's the one-story house next to it. I mean, that one-story house used to having a backyard, you know, opposite their backyard. Now that house has driveways and garages, and it's just, I don't know how the code could address this, but when you change the orientation, somehow I think you need to think about what's existing there and how it impacts them.
Yeah, no, that was my big critique of this one, was that all the other homes on this block facing west. And corner homes do offer the opportunity to do better architecture on the corner, but they completely did reorient the house. And it does change that relationship with the other homes on the block, and so they probably could have easily turned that first unit and faced the street and still figured out the parking and so forth, and then I think it would have been. Doesn't have an orientation, although I think I did see something in the OTR overlay that we should take a look at.
Overlay talks about front doors needing to face certain directions depending on which street they're on.
Yeah,
But in Boulder, they do have a definition that helps you to orient the front yard, which is the shortest street base.
yeah,
And that way, if, you know, they're basically right down on a corner lot, what side is considered the front, and then your setbacks.
Yeah, yeah.
Kind of dictates how people build it.
That's good. I think so.
Home stretch, we want to get you guys all out, reasonable hour. So these are accessory dwelling units that were permitted since 2017. This one is 105 West Cannon. That's the ADU behind it. Seems a bit tall. So this one seems a little tall compared to the main building. You can kind of read that first comment too. I'm assuming that the ratings on this are a little bit harder for folks to assume things like lot usage and. But I don't know if does anyone have a comment? There's another, the next one is pretty similar to this one.
I think the person may have not realized that.
Yeah,
Yeah. The problem with that block is that it's so much higher in the back of the lot, it slopes down. So those ADUs are to height, but they're higher on level than the house. And I don't know how you address that, because you can see that brownish one over there too. That lot is got a bunch,
Some
yeah.
heights are calculated by midpoint of the lot. Like, the
Yeah.
your ADU in the rear point needs to base by the midpoint of the lot, where the principal building, you might have another.
There should be a rule that your ADU can't exceed your main structure. I think
Yeah.
just a general rule of thumb, it can't be.
Yeah.
Some of
No
them,
matter- Yeah, this.
houses are so short though. It's in, like,
It's
I
not
just,
it's not for everyone. I mean, I don't-
but that's like the ADU zoning code by is in old chart. I guess I struggle because in a way we want to preserve these historic homes, but they are tiny. So one way to preserve them is to allow people to build more of a mass in the ADU. And like I'm not one of these houses, but I did have an ADU. I moved a historic home into my lot and served the ADU. My home, the front, the front house, the front of the street cabin, the minor cabin, is 800 square feet, and you know, shorty, like I don't know if I can even build a home that short. And so I guess I just see these
Does it
as
have
a
a
real potential. Yeah, it's a real potential to be the saving grace of historic homes.
I think to your point where you would like to have that system, kind of one-story treatment. But if you're not able to kind of amend living there because families are bigger, or you have a different family definition now, or generational family without the extra ADU taking up some of the opportunity for the lot to have some density on it, then you know, you're on the one hand, you want the density and you want to kind of create more opportunities for different kind of families. But you don't want it because it's too high a lot, you can't have it, you have to kind of decide. I think this will solve it. Right, you're not gonna be able to see maybe some of the two stories, this grade is a little less sloped as you're showing, but it allows you for that to take it up in ways that the front.
Well, I think one thing be there was Nick's during the, I think you guys. City council didn't, but it went. To exempt an ADU basement from the total footage. I mean, that, then you could have. But you could have a 1,500 square foot ADU, but half of it's in the front.
Yeah,
You know?
that makes sense.
I mean,
Nobody can see that. That's right.
That-
Right.
that's the constraint and that they haven't asked for, sorry. As a comparison, but they take these small cottages and they pick them up and they dig out the entire lot. Or that, whatever, it's everything below ground. And then to that, but the point being, can you allow people to max the basement? That's the easy way to maintain all of these. No.
You know, so these are just real briefly, this one and the one before it are really two like really good examples of the kind of giant floor pitch boxes. with the garage.
So,
And they they really dominate, especially when, I mean, when you look at it from the front street, they don't. The previous one, my friends live next door, and I spent a ton of time in their backyard working on the house, and when you see the one from close up, especially from the back, it just towers over everything, including the front house. And that was not, again, it's not the intention of an accessory structure, and the way our code is, it kind of, there's no incentive for somebody to not do this. And I think I would really like to have a further discussion about these incentives that you have proposed. I'm kind of running out of time today, but also this idea of one of the things that came out of this overlay district process was the idea of not counting basement livable square footage against your 750 square feet. And I was encouraging people to get, you can double your living area with a 1 story and a story in the basement. But you're still 1 story. And city council did not approve that. And I remember that discussion, the reasoning in my view was a little like, oh, they're just gonna wrinkle up their houses at basements. Well, we don't want to encourage basements, and they moved on. But I really thought it was a valid idea and something I'd like to put that back on the table and have us discuss.
I think it's an excellent idea.
Well, I thought so too.
And you're
Well,
smart.
I think one of the, that then you'd have 2,200 square feet if you had a basement, a garage, and
You can't build a garage.
ADU.
Oh, yeah, you
You
can.
can.
You're talking about the ADUs, not the main, no, the main homes, you can do that.
Main
No,
homes,
yeah.
right, no, it's the ADUs,
Yeah.
your basement doesn't
So-
get that.
so-
square footage.
So the thought is to allow actually a 1,500 square foot ADU within a 750 square foot footprint.
That was the idea.
If the below grade is not counted towards the GF. the gross square footage.
And I think, I mean, I don't know what other people think, but you could even maybe go garden level. So that it's like a story and a half,
That makes,
so it's not super basementy, you know?
that's where do we dictate stories or do we dictate heights?
But you could do both. And I think also maybe some like form standards of like matching the roof pitch of the existing home or, you know. Not exceeding, you know, because
Well,
I
Mike,
agree.
Kind of an interesting idea, like if we were to exempt the ADUs from a lot of coverage, but also have a key it to the main height of the main building and maybe talk about the basement stuff, like that could be its own thing, except when you get the 2-story home, then would you be allowing a 2? I think the height calibration needs to be looked at.
I wouldn't want somebody to get irritated because, well, why can't I?
Yeah.
Like, I can't build this just because I bought a 1-story home and, you know,
Yeah.
too restricted.
Well, maybe you could relieve the building coverage if they want to do a 1 level, but give them more leeway to do.
Yeah,
Exempting it, that's 750 square feet, that's a lot. I mean, if that's exempted from lot.
We could do some modeling. Ideas. Yeah.
Now you like it.
Yeah. So here's another one. Oh, so this one, pretty similar, what's in to the first one. Those are the marks there. Someone someone asked if it was actually an apartment building. So just, yeah.
See them.
Well, that's the other thing, we haven't really talked about the orientation of all the alleys in Lafayette are flats.
Mhm.
And it makes a big difference if you've got 2 stories. You're just creating more shadow to the north. 2-story. You don't, the sunlight isn't gonna penetrate into the backyard.
What's the setback for an ADU, is it 10 feet from the alley? Just like my alley is, I see with my garage, just I'm sure 10 feet back, so and it's not 2-story.
Here's 201, so it's the red house, the primary structure here. This is the ADU.
This is what I was gonna point out. It is a dwelling of some sort, it looks like, of a garage. No, it's not. flat pitch roof. I mean, to me, this shows that it is possible. They didn't dig down, which you could do, but they didn't dig down. Go to the basement, they don't, the driveway's just straight across the sidewalk, so it shows that it is possible. But you're not maximizing your square footage, because you have maybe your wall around it is not full height wall,
Not that,
but this can be done. A few people have done it. And just, you know, this looks like if you were to take the previous two that we saw, and put them side by side, it's a kind of a noticeable difference. Yeah, I'm familiar with all three of those. Walked by them a lot of times.
This one
Oh, can
got
I-
pretty.
May I ask if are you?
You say
Not-
you
not
is
my
coming next.
professional.
I'm just wondering.
I had no idea.
Dirt, put a foundation and create a conditioned space underground versus something that's just a footer. Could be a mitigating factor on why people would want to consider on a small lot doing something like that because it's.
But there's no reason not to give them the choice to do that.
Yeah. Again, I
You don't mandate it, you just say it's not.
Right. But to answer your question, I did put a basement under my accessory dwelling with a 9-foot ceiling and it's got a lot of light in it. I really thought a lot of it. It's actually a pretty good space. But in terms of cost, yeah, it does cost more, but if you're bringing out crews and maybe Mike can comment more on the cost, but to me, it made a lot of sense to get the extra living space. It's a whole footprint of living space with a full ceiling and everything. And you're bringing out the crews to dig the dirt, set the forms, or the foundation, or the slab. Yeah. You have to dig the ground and do all that stuff for any house, but you
yeah,
dig,
it doesn't double.
but you, absolutely not. But you dig down further.
There's no, we're not talking the garage here.
No, I think in the basement, it does.
It's like a house with a crawl space versus a house with a basement.
Yeah, you've already got to excavate 3.5 feet. You're going down to 8 feet, 9 feet.
Yeah, but I think, like, if you look at a lot of the big buildings that we've seen so far,
I'm just thinking that there are pieces here that we aren't able to control. Construction to a certain extent, but we can definitely provide choices for the opportunity to do that. To
It's up to the owner. So, want to do it.
I think it's good. A lot of the big buildings you've seen so far, actually, you can't see them, but the two-story buildings are actually free. And builders don't do that because it doesn't. It's wonder with the basement. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No.
But did we save the best for last? I had no idea that this was 311 East Chester.
This is the old Circle Motel house that says saved. Yay.
I had no idea.
And
And it got the highest marks.
Oh, God.
This is lovely. Was the first comment. Obviously biased, because it's one of mine. Yeah. I like the proportionality of the two structures a lot. I also like your landscape.
So that's a full basement underneath to 750, but it's 750 square feet counting the basement.
Houses like half that.
Yeah, so imagine if somebody could build 750 and a full basement underneath. It'd probably still be bigger than their initial house, but it doesn't look big.
Yeah, but right now you can't do that. If you build a 750 square foot
And
footprint, it's not like a full square, as your ADU, you cannot have a finished basement.
has no
Because the whole space, a living space you're allowed to have is 750. It's not just a footprint. It's the living space. That was what we were thinking of. Basement thing, like, well, height or massing or shadowing or da. Basement is flat.
the difference between a 3 or 4 person family living in that you.
Versus the garage, that's living space.
No.
You can build a 2-story on the same footprint. And one thing I've noticed is the ones that people like are side street facing, and the ones we don't like are mid-block. And there's something to be said there, right? Because you have much better access from the side street than you do mid-block. Now, would this work mid-block? Because I think these last two would.
You might have to,
I think they would work mid-block.
there has to be an entrance somewhere in the mid block ones, and they could be off the alley. Maybe I've seen them off the side,
Yeah.
or even you walk around and come in from the front.
I think the red one really says, is it facing this way? Or could you turn it 90 degrees and that's facing the alley and it still works, right?
The ones that are in mid-block sometimes will have the stairway off the alley, sort of. I mean, you park back there, you go up your stairs.
But I just think about, ones that are mid-block are the ones that are just these big monstrous,
Mm.
at least that we've seen examples, of, but I'm not sure.
Well, and that allows them to capture more of the little side yard next to, which might be dedicated to you.
Ultimately, the feel that you get is less is more. That kind of.
And vary it,
maybe
vary
some-
everything under conditions.
Is the side yard wall articulation, aggregate over all the buildings on the lot?
I think it's just any one wall plane that exceeds 30 feet in length. I think is the standard, so.
That might be another way to break the space, if you're looking at it in total. All within facing another interior lot, requiring some sort of that.
Or have it be shorter than 30 feet.
I think what we'll do, we have a lot of good notes to digest. There's probably gonna be some themes that comes out of this discussion. We'd like to have, probably not as long of a discussion, but figure out a good way to have some conversations with some folks outside of this group. If y'all are okay with that, kind of exploring this in this kind of a similar way. One of the ways we talked about doing that was just through some specific focus groups. So that would be maybe reaching out to some folks that we know, maybe doing some sort of social media and asking folks to sign up. If you all know of folks that in this area that might be interested in having this conversation, both residents, but also folks that are in the building, field and so on, that would be something that would be great. You could just email me a name or email address. We can reach out to them. Usually these things are great with 6 to 12 people and it's pretty informal. We take an hour.
But they'll go longer.
Yeah,
People share their opinion.
yeah, that's okay too. We might also set up some things of sitting in a coffee shop or doing an online questionnaire, some listening sessions to try to hear some of these things too. I think after this conversation, we might want to talk to staff a little bit more about some of these themes and if we focus those conversations on the main points that came up at this meeting to try to drive those a little bit further.
In the
If the coffee
overlay,
shop in Old Town, you might get a little more engaged.
Yeah, yeah.
in the overlay meetings, I mean, they were actual meetings and there were like 100 people.
Yeah.
So I feel like, I mean, there's a lot of interest in this, so maybe consider something that could be bigger and really well noticed so that, yeah, so that people can, because I mean, there was, and this, how many meetings were there? 7? Yeah, and people came, and so I guess focus groups seem a little insighty to me. I don't think they're bad, but a way to engage as many people as possible.
Would one option be to start testing the water through some like Zoom versions of that to see some, in the past with some projects we did last year, we would have like open houses in this room, but there'd be boards everywhere, but no one would show up. But then we would do a Teams or a Zoom meeting and we get like 30 people. Yeah, it was odd. Yeah, we'll just look at the capacity. Yeah, let's talk.
You mentioned Art Night Out too, you guys.
Yeah, we have a booth there, so we'll have an opportunity. No, we're right next to the beer. Should be good, yeah.
It's a big sign, we want your opinion. Do you think?
Free beer.
Free beer.
Yeah.
And then I'll have some fine print under it.
Right. Stop planning, I have to talk with us for 20 minutes.
Question on the packet here, you've got 5 potential amendment ideas for the overlay district. And maybe we're out of time to go through these tonight. But I appreciate the thought that went into some of these. I have some criticisms on like some of them, but I guess my question is, when's the time when we can actually go through these?
Yeah, this is, I want to talk to Phil, like, because we might recalibrate our next meeting and maybe come back and try to dig through some of this stuff.
It's probably another, we could come back as a full group. We could also do a subgroup as well. And I wasn't planning to, we were looking at July. Grouping. But I'm feeling like if we're trying to understand these key issues and you have specific ideas, who wants to stay longer tonight versus would you be comfortable if we met with anyone who was interested in having this discussion offline? Is that acceptable?
Either.
Yeah. Okay. Why don't I send out a poll, a meeting poll, and then anyone who wants to sign up for it, and we can put your availability in there, and then I'll schedule the meeting with their availability. That way, and then we'll take full notes. That way, because we want to, while it's still fresh. Cool. This was really interesting conversation, really enjoyable. Any closing remarks for?
Good conversation.
Yeah.
Thanks for everything.
Yeah, it was an excellent Sophia. I enjoyed it.
Oh, cool.
I did.
All right.
Let's go over to the one and can enjoy that thing.
I think everybody here does. I do think that the graphics and the potential, this might look like and that.
Yeah.
I know that.
Right.
Evolution, I think that'd be really helpful, especially maybe as you have the conversations with people.
Okay.
Maybe one other thing that I'm thinking and proposing, I think having these examples that we look at for the discussion is really valuable. I know we haven't done that for any of the other kind of zones and maybe it's, we don't exactly have that because we don't have our, single family homes being redeveloped right now. But is there a way we could kind of think about what some of those examples might look like and kind of get this kind of feedback? Because I thought this was a useful way to talk about some of these points.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for everyone's time.
We're now adjourning the planning commission. There's some non-use. So
We need commission comments and.
my questions are around city administrator buildings, email around commissions. I think a couple of us, our terms expire in June. Are we now extended through October, or do we need to? Why, how does that impact the sitting and planning commission?
I will follow up on it. Like, I think the planning commission normal recruitment period is right around now, and I think that's what we're. I don't know the detail on the pivot. I know that we want to get to one recruiting thing, but we also have to do code changes to do that, so there might be an interim thing that we need to do. But I think, let me get back to you, reach out with Lauren. I think plan on applying if your term is expiring in July. Plan on applying. We'll get that out to you and then we'll pivot if we need to, but I think that's probably the easiest thing to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just didn't want to. Oh, sorry, you got booted off because you misread.
No, we don't want that to happen either, so.
The other question I had regarding that email, and this is, I feel gratuitous to ask, but it was brought up a few years ago about having additional perks for board or commission members. One of which was a membership to the rest. And I didn't know if there was any conversation about that, but speaking on that.
Really?
Was that?
Was that really?
I,
Yeah.
I remember being a product at the point, but I think,
Did it get
I
negative?
think telling that to the city council is the right. You guys want to provide that feedback to city council? I think that's the right move. Yeah, but I will, when I have an opportunity, because I think I do remember it being brought up.
I think it was, Mayor Pro Tem Wayne, long, right.
And do we think we're gonna have the second regular planning commission meeting or too early?
Oh, yeah, May 22nd. I don't.
But we might have the first one in June.
No, the land use.
Well, it could be a combination of things. I'm working on some tactical zoning amendments, to bring to the group that we just need to do some, desired kind of quick changes. And so, I'm trying to get that on schedule for the first meeting in June.
I know that's been lacking, so I appreciate it.
Yeah,
We don't know how to be proactive about that. We talked about that in the past.
well, there's two things that we would bring up. There could be more as we get into it, but. And then there's a couple of land use cases that are about the land as well. So, yeah. The two amendments, one is, to allow administrative review of building additions up to a certain size. We have a lot of small building additions that are being proposed, especially in Old Town. And it just requires a lot of heavy lift, given the impact, so that's one. The other one is a land use, table amendment potentially to eliminate, self-storage from commercial zone districts. And put a distance requirement in industrial zone districts from major roadways. So we don't have like self-storage on South Public Road, our main highways. So those are the two things that we're. Yeah. Yeah.
Versus common law.
Yeah, so. So we will we'll follow up on the, if something changes, we'll follow up on the reappointment stuff and, we'll send out an email.
But those of us that might be interested, whose terms might be expired, should probably
Plan on
send
applying,
you
yeah,
an email saying that we're interested.
yeah, if you are. Or you can just tell.
It's an exciting time to be part of this body, so yes.
Changed a lot in many years.
Yeah.
I'm gonna make one last comment too, kind of along those lines, and I'll just, I'm speaking obviously for myself. I live a mile or two away, so these discussions is never a problem for me. I remember the midnight meetings. I'm not advocating to those, but this is early to me for a planning commission meeting, so going back to resolve or solve something is better than revisiting it in a month or so.
I know for Denver
What about?
You can also move.
that.
Not attractive.
We keep getting things up to your signature.
Just get bored. All right,
Um,
thank you all.
move to adjourn the meeting. Sure. Being adjourned.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. Good luck.